Host John Sarianides. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, John Lyons. And yes, we are coming to you again on a Sunday morning. And that's pretty much going to be our routine here for the spring leading up to the draft. I think that for both John and I, Sunday mornings work pretty good. And I think for football fans, it gives you something to look forward to as well. But John, happy Sunday morning. How are you on this first Sunday in March?
Well, of course, John, we're all counting down to Will Campbell's arm measurement day, right? That's this afternoon. Can't wait. Yeah, so no, it's pretty good on this Sunday, John. It's funny. The Super Bowl was a few weeks ago. We're already at the combine. Free agency's what, 10 days from now? Like
Yeah.
we say it every offseason that there's really not that much downtime. It just kind of comes at you fast.
Yeah, well, a week from today, we're going to start getting a pretty good idea of what free agents are going to do, and of course, we'll be here to have that conversation as we preview free agency next week. But of course, we still have one more day of the combine, and for Patriot fans, I think this is the most important day. John, the offensive linemen are going to work out today. The one thing with the combine that makes it tricky is you have a lot of the top tier prospects. They're not even working out there anymore. They're putting all their eggs in their pro day basket. So that's one thing to take into consideration for today. But I do think the other thing to consider is it doesn't matter whether or not a Will Campbell works out or not today. Offensive tackle in particular is such a need for the Patriots that there are a lot of guys that Patriot fans should be looking out for today. And I would say, look, if they don't take an offensive tackle at 4, then you better get to know Josh Connerly. You better get to know Ariante Irsay. You better get to know Ozzie Trapillo, because these are guys that the Patriots could potentially target in round 2 or even a trade back into the first round if they decide to go in another direction at 4. This is a big day for Patriot fans to get familiar with some of the names that they could potentially hear called at the end of next month.
Yeah, look, I mean, Will Campbell's the big story, obviously, his arm length. And by the way, the threshold at 33 inches, Rashawn Slater's right at 33. Sebastian Vollmer was 33 and a quarter. So you can be a really good tackle at 33. It's just under 33. For those watching that maybe aren't sure of that, it's tougher to play tackle with under 33-inch arms. So that is something to watch, because I think if he checks that box, if you will, that's probably the best tackle in the class. And I know Calvin Banks has obviously got an argument for that. And another guy in this whole, not just at the combine, but in this process, I think worth watching is Josh Simmons. He is a season-ending injury in
Very
October.
Underrated.
Yeah, I think he's a really good tackle. And I think people maybe lost sight of that because Donovan Jackson moved over to left tackle for the college football playoff. And by the way, he did a terrific job there at left tackle. But Josh Simmons is a high-end tackle prospect. And if he's healthy and the Patriots want to say trade down and be at 9 or 10 or 11, he could be in play at one of those picks. Or if let's say he's got a couple months left in his recovery, or he's going to have a little slow start, that's a guy that you could trade up for late in the first round. I don't think he'd be there at pick 38. But so point being, I know Will Campbell's the big story, but there's a lot of other guys, whether it be trade back guys in the first round or second round guys. And John, I don't know about you, I wouldn't be surprised if they take more than one tackle in this draft.
I think they have to.
Yeah, so there could be day guys, as well. So I think it's, obviously Will Campbell's the storyline, as I said, but there's a lot of other meat on the bone offensive line-wise for the Patriots today.
Yeah, and there's some other names to keep an eye on, too, to your point about them potentially taking more than one. Other guys like Emory Jones, who I really like out of LSU. He was opposite Will Campbell at right tackle. I think he has the physical tools to potentially play left tackle long-term at 6'5", 312. You got a Johnny Cornelius who played at URI and then transferred to Oregon. Another name to keep an eye on. He could have a big day today, potentially, assuming he works out. There's a lot. Chase Lunt out of UConn, guy that I'm really high on, that I think the Philadelphia Eagles, it was reported yesterday, met with them. They were one of the teams that met with him. I've covered Chase Lunt for the last 3 years. He fits their profile physically.
6'8", man.
Size.
Big dude.
Huge. And so there's a lot, to your point about there being meat on the bone, there's a lot of meat on this bone today. And like I said, that's why, without overstating it, it's the combine. I mean, if people have plans, go out and do your plans. Don't necessarily stay at home to watch it. But if you're sitting around on what is an unseasonably cold day today, put it on, because a couple of these guys could be in that Patriots could be on the Patriots roster come this summer and fall. So it'll be interesting to see what happens today. Of course, we've seen the other positions work out here the first 3 days of the combine. Any notable performances there, John, that might have gotten your attention? For me, nobody really popped. I thought that the defensive linemen, edge guys, were very impressive on Thursday. Outside of that, the tight end class is deep, but they were disappointing to me on Friday. I didn't, I was hoping that a lot of those guys would test better than they did. We all know how good Tyler Warren is and Colston Loveland out of Michigan, but the rest of that group, I thought had the potential to offer some real value in the middle rounds, and they did not test well, in my opinion. Those guys are all going to need to regroup and have pretty good pro days. I thought the DBs were pretty good. Linebackers, Jahad Campbell, a guy that I know you're high on out of Alabama, he was super impressive. But overall, the running backs popped yesterday. But other than that, quarterbacks were okay. Nobody really popped, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you mentioned the running backs. I mean, Donovan Edwards running a 4.45, I thought was pretty good for him. I mean, that's a guy I look at.
Blue running a sub 4.4.
Yep. Yeah, I look at Donovan Edwards as that early day 3 potential running back target for the Patriots. And he's an interesting guy in that was 2 years ago in the national championship game. He was fantastic, but he was splitting time most of that year with Blake Corum, and he was more of a receiving back. Then last year, he averaged 4.7 yards per carry, but he only had, I think, 592 yards, and he fumbled the ball 3 times. So there's some inconsistency there, but I like him a lot from a pass catching perspective. And I think that's something maybe he could come in and develop in that role. So I thought that was good. Matthew Golden obviously ran really well, which
I think
maybe could be
in the first round.
Yeah, I think so too, because he's kind of flown under the radar, not from the standpoint of being a good player, but from being a first-round pick. I think a lot of people looked at it like you have Tet McMillan, you have Egbuka. I'm going to say that wrong, from Ohio State.
Egbuka, yeah.
Egbuka, right. So you have those, like, people looked at those guys as the first-round picks, and I think Golden never really got enough credit for being a first-round level talent. And I think after the combine, maybe you see him in the mid-20s get selected, or early 30s at worst.
Sooner than that, I think if I don't think he runs in his pro day now, but I think if he at least does something on his pro day, you could see him go in the teens. I don't think it's inconceivable now because, I mean, again, speed matters. And that's a position where you look at a team like the Green Bay Packers at 23 potentially, to your point about him going in the 20s. They could go defensive back or offensive line. They could also go edge. But if they don't, and you're looking at that other receiver to that young group that they have, he could potentially be a great fit for them there. So you know how it is, John. You've coached receivers. You've coached football. You can never have enough speed.
Yeah, and like Jack Besh, who I feel like
I like him a lot.
Well, the Senior Bowl, I think he helped himself a lot. He continued to help himself, I think, over the course of this week. So that's another guy, maybe not a first-round pick, but in that, if the Patriots wanted to with 38, maybe in that sort of range. And this receiver
right back into the second round even.
Sure. Yeah. And like this receiver group is interesting to me. Like Trey Harris, probably my favorite receiver in the class. But you look around, like Tet McMillan's a really interesting prospect. Luther Burden, I feel like he's flown under the radar. But
it's interesting that you say that with him, because I think coming into the season, a lot of people thought he could potentially be a top 10 pick. That's not going to happen. But
no.
Really solid production in Missouri, tested really well yesterday, ran well. We know what kind of a route runner he is and how explosive he can be after the catch. Now, he's not a burner. He's not a guy that's a big play guy per se, but he is going to move the chains. He helped himself a lot.
Yeah. Jaden Higgins, too, like 6'4", 215. Like, that's another guy. I wouldn't maybe go for him at 38, but it's just – that's a guy that you could probably get in the late second round if you traded back up into the end of the second round, who'd be a good player for you. So I just think this receiver group as a whole, especially after the combine testing this week, there's a lot to like there. And I think there's a lot more depth than everyone looks at Tet McMillan. I get it at the top of the draft, Travis Hunter, if he plays receiver, but I feel like, even Isaiah Bond, that's going to be a late day 2 pick. And I think he could be in the right offense, a good NFL player. And again, I think this receiver group has a lot, maybe not as much depth and not as much high-end talent as, say, 2019, but I think it's got a lot of that day 2-ish depth, which I think is going to be value for a lot of teams.
Yeah, and I've said it a lot in recent years, John, where I feel that the wide receiver position is going to be a position of strength every year in the NFL draft.
Yeah, and you're right about that. I mean, yeah.
Even if it's a year where you may not have star power at the top. I mean, if Travis Hunter decided he wanted to play receiver full-time, certainly he fits that bill. You got Ted McMillan at Arizona, who was super productive, also passes the eye test physically. I mean, he's a big receiver, profiles as an X-type. You don't necessarily have the star power, the top 5 pick type talent outside of Hunter and McMillan. But, again, wide receiver is a position, because it's so overdeveloped now at all levels of football, you're going to be able to get a quality receiver well into day 3 and somebody who can make an impact. So Patriots don't necessarily, there's enough depth in this receiver group that they can wait until rounds 4 and 5 to really jump into this group and add another body to the mix. I still think you're probably going to see them bring in a veteran in free agency, but I also still can see them bringing in a young receiver that they can develop and allow to compete with Kayshon Boutte and Pop Douglas and those guys. So it's certainly a position to keep an eye on. But as I said, today's obviously the big day with their need at offensive tackle. One of the big storylines coming out of the combine too, John, was the Patriots' reported interest in Travis Hunter. It sounds like they're definitely interested in him. It sounds, based on what came out of Indianapolis, our Andy Backstrom was there, that if he's sitting there, that he will be a part of the decision. Do you buy all of this Travis Hunter talk, or do you think it's a classic pre-draft smokescreen by the Patriots?
I buy that they like him because A, he's a great player. B, I know Bill's not here anymore, but that word versatility is still going to be part of the Patriots. They love that stuff. And my issue with Travis Hunter, first of all, I think he's going to be a great pro, and I think he'd be worthy of the 4th overall pick. My only issue there, and why I wouldn't do it, is I think he's primarily going to play corner, and you already have an all-pro level corner in Christian Gonzalez, and you just have so many other needs. Like if they settle left tackle and receiver in free agency or trades before the draft, then I'm much more open to it, because I think over the next 5 years, a corner combination of Gonzalez and Hunter would be the best in the NFL. Issue is, if you already have an all-pro corner, you have a safety group that I know didn't play well this year, but you know who's coming back, you have some faith in them. Do you want to spend a top 5 pick on another corner when you have such glaring needs at receiver, at tackle, and even to the Hunter, playing both ways point? Realistically, in the NFL, he's not going to play 110 snaps every game, every week, playing both sides of the ball. It's going to be 60 snaps on defense and 12 or so snaps on offense. And those 12 snaps will be great, but is that enough to alleviate your need at receiver? Like, I don't think so. Like, that's my issue. Is I love the player, think he's going to be a great pro. I just, with their needs, I don't think that's a great fit for them at 4, unless they do some drastic stuff in free agency and via trade.
It's so hard for me because I love the idea. I've always loved the idea. I've just never bought the idea, because I think they truly are going to focus on building from the inside out. That's how Vrabel wants to build this roster. That's how he wants to play. We saw that firsthand in Tennessee. But I also find it concerning, John, that he was going into, at the end of the season, going into this draft season, a lot of people felt he was a consensus number 1 player in this class. He was being labeled a generational talent. It's interesting to me to see that how much his star has somewhat faded here in the last few weeks. And now all of a sudden, you're hearing Abdul Carter talk at the top, more Tennessee trade down talk. All of a sudden, Cam Ward, Shadur Sanders are starting to sound better than they did earlier this year and after the season. So it's interesting to me that his star is fading a little bit, because I still think pound for pound, he's probably the most talented player in this class. He's probably the best player in this class. I have him slightly ahead of Abdul Carter. But all that being said, I think you bring up a great point, which is, let's say they were to land a Ronnie Stanley to play left tackle, they overpay him. Baltimore doesn't want to pay that. They move on. I think Baltimore's going to make a concerted effort to keep him. They haven't franchised him yet, so it doesn't appear like they're going to. But they'll make a run at keeping him. But let's say you land a Ronnie Stanley. And again, we've talked about this, right? The Patriots are going to have to pay the suck tax to land a free agent of that caliber. If you get him, and let's say you bring in a Chris Godwin at wide receiver, just throwing that out there. Yeah, then I'm with you 100%. You know what? As much as you'd love to have Will Campbell, I don't think you pass up on a guy like Hunter who can play 30, 40 snaps on defense and then play another 10 to 15 on offense. And now all of a sudden you have a dynamic two-way player that can do a lot of different things for you. Because I will say this, and maybe it's the offensive coordinator in me. If you give me a dude like that for 15 snaps a game, you better damn well believe I'm going to find a way to use him and I'm going to get the ball in his hands. So he doesn't have to be a full-time starting receiver for me to make an impact. I think he can make an impact on a snap count. So, again, I think a lot of this will ultimately come down to two things. One, what do they do in free agency? And two, how does the top of the draft shake out? I still have a hard time believing that a team like Cleveland would pass up on him unless an Abdul Carter was sitting there. I still think he'll be gone by 4, but you never know.
Yeah.
I mean, again,
well, if Cleveland trades Myles Garrett and then they select Abdul Carter to replace it, that I could maybe see. But Cleveland, if I'm Cleveland, if they like one of the quarterbacks at the top, I mean, Deshaun Watson's not the guy. And I know they're paying him a lot of money, but they might have to go the quarterback route because I think Tennessee as well. I mean,
yeah, Tennessee and the Giants could very easily go quarterback.
All those teams need, and it's not like last year where you had 3 guys at the top of the draft that everyone liked and thought could be good players. It's maybe, Cam Ward, I think, is going to be a good player. Not so sure about Sanders. I don't know as much beyond that as far as first round talent. So it's going to be like, I would not be surprised, John, if one of Carter and Hunter is there at 4. Like, I kind of expect one of those guys to be there at 4. I'm just not sure which one it's going to be. And that's why, as we were talking about, this free agency and trade season is so important for the Patriots because they have these multiple needs. If they just had a need at tackle, we could sit here and say, hey, sign this tackle, take whoever you want in the draft, or sign whoever you want, take this tackle in the draft, because it's a need at tackle, a need at receiver, a need at defensive tackle, a need at linebacker, a need at running back, because tight end even. Because they have all these needs, it, in a way, like, sometimes it feels like it increases their flexibility, but also in some ways it doesn't, because if you had less needs, like if it was the Eagles or the Chiefs that picked number 4, they could take Travis Hunter and not look back. Patriots are in a little bit of a tougher position with that, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And again, I think, look, it's about getting impact players. And today, and this is why, and I don't want to overstate it, but this is why today is important, right? Because we don't know what the Patriots truly feel about Will Campbell. I mean, I say it all the time. I've said it for 20 plus years covering the NFL draft, that when it comes to the NFL draft, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And you and I know this as guys that have coached college football, and we know this as football guys. What I may think of one player is you'll have a completely different opinion and vice versa. So this idea that they may not love Will Campbell. They may look at Will Campbell and they may not care about the arm issue or his arm length, but they may look at him and say, you know what? We don't like this about his game. We would rather address this need here and then turn around and address offensive tackle in the second or third round. Again, a lot of it is who's out there scouting these guys. Are they willing to bang the table come draft week? Are they willing to get behind a guy and put their reputation on the line? There's a lot that goes into this process. It's not as simple as, all right, Vrabel and Elliott Wolf are going to make these decisions, and that's it. People are going to have to live with him. Speaking of Elliott Wolf, were you surprised that he said this week that he still has final say over the roster?
Yeah, especially because I don't think he does. That's why, and look, he might.
Too.
Yeah, and I also found it interesting they had Vrabel speak first because new head. And look, I know he's the head coach. He just got here. I get it, but I just felt that was a subtle signal that maybe it's kind of Vrabel's show and he's leading the charge. But yeah, I mean, I look at this as within the next 3 years, it's going to be Mike Vrabel and Ryan Cowden, and maybe Wolf will still be here, maybe not. But unless unless these draft picks from last year, Jalen Polk, Javen Baker, Caden Wallace, if they really pop with this coaching staff and being better coached, for lack of a better term, then maybe they'll look at Wolf and say, okay, this guy does know what he's doing. But if they don't pop, they're going to look at Wolf and say, hey, man, this is our show. Like, you can be here, but this is our show. You're going to follow our lead. And I think really within I'd say 2 to 3 years, you're going to see it being the Mike Vrabel, Ryan Cowden show. And I don't think Vrabel will ever have the power that Belichick had from 2004 on. But
No.
I could see it being a setup like Belichick and Pioli in the early years where, yeah, Bill's the head coach and, has a lot of power. But Pioli, in a sense, I mean, those first 3-4 years, he was essentially an equal to Bill, and he could disagree with Bill, and maybe Bill had the final say, but he probably wasn't going to do anything without Scott being on board with it. And then that dynamic changed after the third Super Bowl. So I think we could see a dynamic like that where Vrabel is the most powerful, but Cowden is powerful enough where there's a balance there.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point about Ryan Cowden, and he wasn't brought here just to play second fiddle to whoever was the leftover in the front office. The reality is he was brought here to be groomed as the next either vice president of football operations. I mean, the Crafts don't like giving the term general manager. I've never understood that. That's never made sense.
Yeah, the
to
last one was Bobby Greer, right?
Bobby Greer's the last one to have that.
Yeah.
That right.
That title. Yeah.
That title with the Patriots. It's crazy. But yeah, I thought it was an interesting comment to make. I do think him and Wolf have a pretty good relationship. I do think that Elliott Wolf is well respected around the league. How could he not be? He's the son of NFL Hall of Famer Ron Wolf. But that being said, you don't pay Mike Vrabel what we're assuming is $15 million a year if he's not pretty much the final decision maker. I mean, I would imagine that their setup is very similar to what you see in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, where, yeah, John Lynch picks players per se, but Kyle Shanahan decides whether or not he wants them finally on his roster. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, that's to be debated. I just thought that was a pretty interesting comment. Any takeaways from what Mike Vrabel had to say on Tuesday?
I mean, not so much. I think what we're seeing out of Vrabel, by the way, it's a little bit different than what we saw last year, right? With no comments about we're not going to have a hard ass culture anymore, right? But look, I think
they're going to have a hard ass culture.
Yeah, they certainly are. I think what we're seeing out of Vrabel is really what we've expected all along. They're going to build from the inside out. I did find the only thing, I guess, when he said hopefully we'll be aggressive in free agency, I think he really wants to be aggressive in free agency. And obviously some of that is
market. I mean, you saw it yesterday. San Francisco trades Deebo Samuel for a 5th-round pick to the Commanders, which, by the way, I don't know what the Patriots think of Deebo Samuel internally, but I would hope they were in on that a little bit.
I would have done that for a 5th-round pick. And look, there's questions about Deebo
all day.
Yeah, and look, Deebo last year to me, and this is just watching him from afar, but he looked overweight and he did not look as explosive as in years past. However, when that dude has been healthy and been at the right weight, maybe the most difficult player to defend in the NFL. I mean, with all the different things he can do. So if he can be fully committed at the right weight, fully healthy, you put him on a Washington team, they're going to be awesome. But even you put him here, he would have been really good. So for a 5th-round pick, I would have done that.
I would have done it too. I mean, I would hope that San Francisco didn't trade him in the conference to a potential playoff rival down the road. I would hope that they didn't trade him there simply because of the Adam Peters, John Lynch dynamic with their relationship. I would hope that he was put out there, and it sounds like he was. And if that were the case, again, if you're the Patriots, he's exactly what you need from a veteran standpoint. I'm not overpaying for DK Metcalf. I'm not overpaying for an AJ Brown. Not that he would be available anyway. I'm not overpaying for those guys. A Deebo Samuel is what you need. A veteran, proven receiver who can come in, lead the receiver room. He's got a proven track record of success. Like you said, dynamic player, could really be a good fit in this offense, especially as a slot running back type.
I did see some people say that, oh, I don't think he'd fit in Josh McDaniels' offense, which I was like,
idiotic. That's idiotic.
What?
I think he'd be a great fit in that offense.
Yeah, first of all, and also one thing, Josh has proven a lot in his time as OC. One thing he's really proven is he can adapt to a bunch of different guys. I mean, look at the offense he ran in 2007 versus the offense he ran in 2014. A lot of differences in how they approach things, the way they move the ball down the field. So, he would have been fine in Josh McDaniels' offense. I don't think that's...
I'm honestly, John, and I don't want to get on my soapbox here, but I'm so sick and tired of the stupid crap that's being said by members of the media when it comes to X's and O's. I'm so done with it. It's just, it's First of all, the recency bias drives me nuts. Of course, everybody loves the Shanahan, McVay, McDaniel version of the West Coast offense. They don't motion enough. They don't trade enough. They don't do this. They don't do that. Give me a break. Okay. At the end of the day, it comes down to talent. It's all about talent. It's easy to do all those things when you have people that you can do those things with, put the ball in their hands, and they can make plays with it. Okay. They don't have enough talent. They can window dress. They can motion, they can shift, they can run return motion, double motion. They can do all this shit all they want. At the end of the day, whoever ends up with the ball in their hands, if they're not a difference maker, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And so a guy like Deebo Samuel could have been that difference maker.
Yeah, and I think for a fifth-round pick,
Josh McDaniels wasn't going to be able to use him is just flat out stupid.
Oh, I agree. I mean, he's proven time and again he can use all kinds. I mean, like Randy Moss set a record for touchdowns, and Julian Edelman won a Super Bowl MVP. Like, I just thought that was dumb. But a fifth-round pick for Deebo, like I would have done that. I would be if I'm them. I'm pursuing DK Metcalf aggressively. I'm looking. Christian Kirk is a name that's been out there. I don't love that player, but he'd still be better than anyone else you have. I mean, if we're being honest. So I think they have real avenues via trade. And I know there's been some talk if Brandon Ayuk could also be available. I don't know if that changes with Deebo now being gone, because the 49ers, obviously with Ricky Pearsall being drafted last year, do have two young receivers that are good in him and Ayuk. So if I were them, I wouldn't move on from Ayuk.
Anywhere.
But I think there's real avenues here, more so via trade. And even T. Higgins, if he gets tagged, you can tag and trade him. Like, so I think there's some avenues there for them to improve the receiver room, because you said this earlier on, and I agree with you. Yes, I want them to draft a receiver probably sometime on day 2, but I want multiple veterans added to this group. I don't want to rely on young guys, whether it's Jalen Polk bouncing back, Javon Baker bouncing back, Demario Douglas, and I love Demario Douglas, but still young player who's been in multiple different offenses already in his career. I want at least one, if not two, legit vets added to that receiver room.
Yeah, I agree. They need that. I mean, you've got plenty of young receivers. I wouldn't have a problem with them walking away from this draft not taking one at all. I know some people are going to say, what? What are you talking about? I mean, I'd be okay with that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you're better off at that position, to your point, bringing in a veteran. And I think there are veterans that are going to be available. You just named some. Obviously, we saw Samuel get traded yesterday. Christian Kirk, who I'd probably like a little bit more than you, but I would love to see him potentially be here. There's no chance the Jets trade Devontae Adams here. I think he ends up somewhere else. They're not going to trade him within the division.
And I don't think they'll cut him either. They'll try to get something.
They'll try to get something for him. But Cooper Kupp is still a possibility.
That's another. I didn't even mention
get him from one of those 2 third-round picks. I mean, again, people are going to say, oh, his injury history, this or that. Listen, when that guy's healthy, one of the 5 best route runners in the league, top 5 hands, he's strong after the catch. He can extend plays. He's a guy that moves the chains. He's exactly what they need to complement the young guys that they have. So he's going to be in play here, and I think he could potentially be a pretty good fit in this system, especially operating out of the slot. So this idea that, again, a Deebo Samuel wouldn't have fit in here is just silly to me.
Yeah.
That's your best avenue to fix this team, because here's the thing. You can pursue a Chris Godwin. Again, the suck tax. You're going to have to overpay for a guy like that. You're not just simply going to get him on the cheap. He's not upping his family and moving them up here to play up here if you're not willing to pay him more than Tampa Bay Buccaneers would have.
Yeah, I agree. And I like Godwin, the player, but if my choice is
his injury history concerns me, though.
Yeah, and that's what right. Like the injury history, the money, like if my choice is him or one of those trade targets we mentioned, whether it's Kupp, Metcalf, whoever, I probably lean the trade guy. And again, even a tag and trade with Higgins. And again, like Godwin, the player, I'd like them to bring him in, but I think there's even better options out there than him. But if they walk away from free agency with Chris Godwin and some sort of answer at tackle, whether it's Ronnie Stanley, who we all want, even Cam Robinson, something like that, then I think already it gives you more flexibility in the draft, and you feel a lot better about both of those position groups, just with those 2 guys. But I want more than one vet added to that receiver room. A Godwin himself, you'd be a lot better. I would like it, but I want another vet as well, especially with the uncertainty around Kendrick Bourne as well. I don't think Kayshon Boutte's a long-term guy in that receiver room. I know he flashed at times last year, but I just don't think he gets it, if you know what I mean. So I look at it as I want to add multiple vets, and Godwin's great, fine, but I would want someone else in addition to Godwin as well.
You are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. As always, I'm joined by WEI's John Lyons, and we're going to be coming to you on Sunday mornings, and certainly if that changes, we'll let you know during the week, but we'll be coming to you on Sunday mornings. So if you want some really good Patriots talk, come on over and give us a watch. You can watch the show live on Facebook, X, Twitch, and our YouTube page. As always, you can also join the conversation. We encourage you to join the conversation just like we do during our post-game show during the season. Please feel free to chime in. We would love to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts on this. What do you want to see the Patriots do in free agency? What would you like to see them do in the draft? If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, feel free to jump on and share them with us. John, you read an article that was put out this morning in the Herald by our good friend Andrew Callahan and Doug Kai, two of the best in the business. Andrew and Doug do great work, and they always put out good stuff. Just some thoughts on the piece. I thought there were some interesting tidbits that came out of this piece that they put out this morning in regards to the Patriots in terms of the draft and free agency. And of course, we do a weekly Patriots journal here where any information we get, we pick up along the way, we share with you from our sources, but they put out some pretty good stuff.
Yeah, and of course, they had good insight on the Patriots, free agency, the draft, all that. What did my eyes immediately go to? Gerard Mayo and Robin Glazer. So that is
so let's start there then.
Yeah,
why make the 196 people watching this wait? If they didn't read the article, go.
Yeah, so
start
look,
there, this is
I found it interesting that according to their sources that they're Gerard Mayo, it seems like either whether it's he doesn't want to or he's unsure, might not coach again. And it said that in the article that multiple sources doubt if he'll return from coaching. And this is a guy, if we remember his track record, was working outside of football, basically was convinced by Belichick and the Patriots to come coach. He coaches, has a good experience as an assistant, a terrible experience as a head coach. Maybe now he looks at it and says, you know what? I've had enough of this. I'm going to go back to what I was doing before I was coaching. So I can kind of see it like it makes sense, but still, he's a young guy who's already has NFL coaching experience and head coaching experience. He could get back in the game at any point, I think, if he wanted to. But I found that really interesting.
Yeah, so do I. I was told from a very reliable source that he would like to coach again, but he's not just going to jump at anything. And he's going to take his time with it. He's not just going to pick up his family and set up new roots somewhere else. That he wants to coach again, but it's got to be the right opportunity at the right time. That's what I was told.
Yeah, and if you think about from his perspective, like I said, he's still in his 30s. He's probably got 2 or 3 more years left on his contract, fully guaranteed. So he can kind of be picky and choosy with what he wants to do. Maybe he wants to coach in college. As we've seen, we saw Bill go there. We've seen other high-profile NFL guys go back to college. Maybe he wants to coach in the NFL, but only in a specific situation with 2 or 3 sets of criteria. So I agree. I think that's a good point, John, in that because of the flexibility he has now and his age, I think he's going to be picky about where he goes.
I can see him doing TV.
Yeah, and he did TV before, and I think he did a good job.
Sports Boston. Yeah, I could see him doing TV. I think see that.
I think the issue with him doing TV is anyone watching a TV show with him on it, their recent memory of him is a failed year as a head coach and getting fired right after a game. And I know that's not fully fair for a team, but I think if he wants to really be on TV, it probably would serve him better to have another coaching experience with a little bit more success. But
the only thing, and I agree with you, the only reason I would push back on that is there were a lot of people out there, particularly nationally, that were sympathetic to him, that felt that he didn't get a fair shake, that felt that if it wasn't for Mike Vrabel being available, he might have gotten another year. So I do think that while there was a local narrative to his tenure here, I do think that the national narrative is a lot different. And so with that, if he wanted to, again, we it's not like we talked to him and we're privy to his thought process, but if he wanted to, he could potentially pursue that avenue, of course, provided there were opportunities there.
Yeah, so I found that interesting. Of course, Donta Hightower, Taylor Embry, TC McCartney, all unemployed right now. I was a little surprised with TC McCartney. He's been around the league
He
a
did a
little
good
bit.
job with Drake May this year. Doesn't get as much credit as he should.
Yeah, and he worked with Kyle Shanahan for a while as well in San Francisco. Like
With
I would,
AVP couldn't get a job. He ended up settling for an offensive assistant with the Rams.
yeah, and so I was a little surprised that AVP also had to settle for that, but that TC McCartney didn't have a job yet. Again, I think you're right. He didn't get enough credit for helping to develop Drake May, and it's a guy that's worked with Shanahan, been around the league a while. I just thought that would be a guy that I can see Hightower not having a job, or Tyler Hughes or Taylor Embry, but I thought TC McCartney would have gotten a job pretty quickly.
Yeah, and Tyler Hughes ended up back at he's back with Kalen DeBoer. He's at Alabama now as an offensive analyst. So
Yeah, well, that's what happens if something doesn't go well coaching. Yeah.
it's the unfortunate side of the business, John, and you and I know it all too.
Oh, hang on, John. We got breaking news. Will Campbell, 32 and 5/8 arm.
Oh boy! Oh boy! Oh boy! There we go.
I'm just pulling it up now. It's Daniel Jeremiah had it, and Josh Simmons, 6 foot 317, 30. Josh Simmons exactly 33 inches.
Yeah, he's more than 6 feet though.
Yeah, and let's see. I'm trying. Yeah, Will Campbell, 32 and 5/8 arm.
That's good.
So,
That's how again, I think it's foolish, but this tells me two things. One, 3/4 of the league is now obviously out on him. Not that they were into to draft him to begin with, because he's not going to fall to half the league. But I think the other thing now is the conversation is going to pivot with him to a degree. There's going to be some teams that are going to look at him and say, guard, he'd have to kick inside. And now it becomes a matter of, do you spend a top 5 pick on a guy who could kick inside, and at best you get Quentin Nelson, or do you take him at 4 and still give him a shot at left tackle and see if he can play against those wide fives and have, a level of success against them?
yeah, and that's and we talked about this to start the show, that Rashawn Slater's right at 33 inches. Sebastian Vollmer was 32 and a quarter, or excuse me, 33 and a quarter. So you can be an effective tackle and be right at that 33-inch threshold. I just think when you're getting back to 32 and 5/8, now I'm a little bit concerned about the bend with some of the edge rushers you're going to face, not just in the AFCs, but across the NFL.
Right. And so now if you're Will Campbell, it becomes about your whole body fundamentals. We know he's athletic. Yeah. We know he has really good hips. He can unlock his hips, knees, ankles, and he has good feet. We know that he's fundamentally sound. We know the vertical length is there with him. The question now becomes, to your point, it's about, can he compete at a high level at the point of contact? There comes a point of contact as an offensive tackle, particularly against speed rushers that can run the hump and get on your hip on the outside. Now that's where the length comes in, right? Because when does he make that point of contact and strike? The longer the arms, if you're fundamentally good, the easier it is to stone a guy and to force him into a secondary move. The shorter the arms, he's more likely to get in on you, and now he covers more ground, and now you're pressing and the pocket collapses. So it's going to be an interesting conversation now, because I really do think, John, you're going to see a pivot with some of these teams in the way they evaluate him. They're going to look at him, even if he has – I'm not sure he's going to work out today or not. I haven't heard either way, but even if he doesn't, I do think now, whether it's here or at his pro day, I think that the perception of him changes. I think you're going to see him slip a little bit now. I think he probably falls out of the top 5.
And I think, your point about the strike and the timing of it is a good one, because I think if you have a tackle with shorter arms, what's the defense going to do? Maybe widen out their ends, play a wide 9 technique.
We're living in an era of wide 5s and wide 9s.
Yeah, right. It's been happening for a while now. And I think you're going to see teams, let's just say you draft Will Campbell, you put him at left tackle. You and I know it. Teams are going to widen out their defensive ends, fly off the edge, and they're going to see how quickly Will Campbell can get into them. And I think with shorter arms, it just makes it a little bit more difficult. And you and I know this too, that extra 0.2 of a second that you'd have with longer arms for a quarterback in the pocket, that could be the difference between a successful play and an unsuccessful play. So I know it's only, when you look at it on the surface, okay, it's half an inch, whatever. But when it comes to defensive ends widening out and where you're going to strike them and when in the protection, it can make a difference. Unfortunately, I mean, I feel bad for Will Campbell, but it can make a difference.
Yeah, we had quasi breaking news here on Patriots Pulse. And we
Yeah, we
didn't
were
break
waiting
it.
for the
DJ
omelet.
did
Yeah.
from Indianapolis.
And Josh Simmons too, right at 33. So that's another. I mean, I'm just saying, right at
Well, and
33 and
John,
charm.
this is, and listen, I think this is, and by the way, for those watching the show, this is why you watch this show, because we're coming at it from a coaching perspective. We're not just two media guys.
And like Will, sorry, one other point on Will Campbell too. Like Josh Simmons is 6'5" with 33-inch arms. Campbell is 6'6", so like he is tall,
Yeah,
he is long.
length matters,
right? So like that helps him, and I think that helps with some of the stuff we're talking about. It's just again, if you're playing a team with a wide defensive end who flies off the edge, if Will Campbell had longer arms and gets to that guy a tenth of a second sooner, it does make a difference.
Well, right. The other thing that you have to keep in mind here is if you're a shorter arm guy, the one advantage you do have is you're going to have to shoot your hands later. But once you shoot those hands, if you get that inside breastplate and you can get that inside hand position now and you can control the defender, it's harder for the defender to get off. Whereas if you're going up against a guy with longer arms, that guy can now, if he doesn't beat you flat out with a speed rush and a dip and lean, he has a surface to work with longer armed guys. Shorter arm guys tend to strike later, but once they strike, they tend to stay more engaged at the point of contact. So I think that's an important piece here. I'm not saying, again, the Patriots should take him and make him their left tackle. I still think if you like him at 4, take him. I mean, if the worst thing you can do here is kick him inside and get an all-pro caliber guard out of it, then so be it. We're living in an era now where you're seeing tackles convert to guards all the time. That's most recent example, Mekhi Becton.
I was just going to say his name. Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, and he helped the Eagles win a Super Bowl. Yeah. So if he's going to be a guard, I wouldn't take him at 4 because of the Patriots' glaring needs at other positions. And this goes back to our earlier conversation. If you sign Ronnie Stanley in free agency and then you take Will Campbell and that's your left side of the offensive line, you're pretty damn good for a long time. But I just think they have greater needs there. But you know this, John. There's going to be teams that don't care about his arm length at all. We saw Dante Scarnecchia say this.
I would be in that camp. I don't care.
Right. And we saw Dante Scarnecchia say this last month that, arm length really isn't as big a deal as people think. But we also know there's going to be multiple teams that are like, all right, we're not taking him now in the top 10, which now.
Well, to your point about the Patriots at 4, I think if Mayo's still here and Scott Peters is evaluating him, they definitely don't take him.
Yeah. And I think if you trade down from 4, at first, I would say Will Campbell would have been gone by 9 or 10. Now, maybe he's still there because there's a team or 2 or 3 in that top 10 that say, you know what, great player, we're not doing it with 32 and 5/8 inch arms. And I, right or wrong, I think we're going to see that. And I think now another guy who enters the conversation is Kelvin Banks, because I think we've looked at Kelvin Banks as a guy that was going to be that second offensive lineman taken, maybe in that 10 to 14 range. Now, maybe a team at 7 or 8 or 9 who is worried about Will Campbell's arms, maybe they take Kelvin Banks. So if you, the Patriots, think Kelvin Banks is the best player and you can put Josh Simmons in that conversation as well, then maybe you have to think about them at 4 if you like them as much as Will Campbell or better, because I can see them being in more demand.
The only reason I would throw cold water on that is I wouldn't take Banks at 4. See, for me, I place more of an emphasis on vertical height than arm length.
Sure.
If you're going to play tackle in this league, I need 6'4" and change minimum. 6'4", you better be a pretty damn good fundamental football player to survive in this league as a 6'4" tackle. Okay, you could do it 10, 15 years ago. When Logan Mankins was doing it for the Patriots, that was fine. You could do it then. But we saw in the Super Bowl a 6'5" Joe Thuney. Yeah, he was doing a pretty good job up until he ended up matching up against Josh Sweat in that front. And then all of a sudden, the lack of vertical length came into play in that game.
Yeah. And we saw the Patriots target Nate Solder. And I know this is going back a while, but target a guy that they took a year to develop.
I can tell you right now, vertical length matters more to Scar, too, than arm length.
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, Will Campbell and I put Simmons in there as well. They have an advantage with the vertical length. They're taller guys, and I think we also have to be careful. And I go back to the Tyquan Thornton, George Pickens conversation from a couple years ago or a few years ago, that Thornton had all these measurables, the relative athletic score, the speed. But if you just watch it,
Yeah,
Pickens is the better player,
yeah,
right? And I think that's why you got to be
even
like,
close
oh,
in my opinion.
right. Like you look at Will Campbell, okay, he doesn't have the arm length, but if you look at him, the dude's a great football player, and he's
Yes,
gonna
look
be a
at his
great NFL player.
production in college.
Right. So that's why, again, you and I know it. There are going to be teams scared away by this arm length, but then there's going to be teams that don't care. And what I want to know, and I think what we got to keep our eye on, do the Patriots look at vertical length at 6'6", Will Campbell, and say, hey, that's more important and we'll take him? Or with Mike Vrabel, Ryan Cowden, are they looking at it and saying, nope, not 33-inch arms, as good as he is, we're not taking him? Because I think with the previous regime, and not Mayo, but with the Belichick regime, they probably would have taken Will Campbell in the top 10 if they really had a need there, especially with Scarnecchia. But
Yeah.
I'm not as sure.
I agree with you with the uncertainty. Now, this does put four. This could, I should say it does. I mean, let's not overreact to this either. It could potentially put four in play now, where they could potentially go in another direction that maybe Will Campbell's not necessarily a lock anymore. But keep in mind, he did draft Peter Skoronsky in Tennessee,
Yeah.
and they kicked him in.
Skoronsky ultimately played guard down there, right?
Yeah,
So
he is a guard.
it's just that's the issue is you're probably right. Will Campbell will come in and he'll be an all-pro level guard, and he might be a really good tackle. It's just your need to tackle is a multi-year need, so glaring.
Yes, and do you even really have an interior need with this team, right? I mean, if you could ever get Cole Strange to stay healthy, he could be your left guard or center at some point.
I think
Mike Onwenu. You've got Layden Robinson. You mentioned Caden Wallace last week, who at this point should probably settle in at guard. You have City So. You have bodies there. I'm not sure. This is where you can sell me on the idea, John, that they're not taking Will Campbell, because I think they have a lot of bodies in there that they really need to give a fair evaluation to, because I do think that there could be two starters in that group.
Yeah, and City So's a weird one that 2 years ago, he played a lot, and I thought the second half of 2023, he was playing pretty well, and then for some reason in Van Pelt's offense just didn't fit. They played him at fullback more than they played him on the O-line.
It's like Layden Robinson last year. Layden Robinson had a similar season.
Yeah, and I think out of Layden Robinson, Caden Wallace, and you can add in City So, one of those guys should be good enough to be your right guard. If you put, Onwenu at right tackle, or as we talked about last week, if Caden Wallace all of a sudden comes on this spring and he can be your right tackle, then Onwenu's your right guard. The only thing I would say on the interior is David Andrews is probably only going to play one more year. So is Cole Strange your long-term center? If he is, who's your left guard? Or if you want Cole Strange as your left guard, who's your long-term center?
Well,
and the answer could be in that group.
You have to figure out this May what you're doing with Strange in that fifth-year option. Are you picking it up or not? My guess is they're probably not.
No, but I don't think they're going to pay him, because what would it be, like $9 million or $10 million or whatever it is for a guy who's barely played for them?
So he has 1 year to prove that he's worth retaining if they opted to re-sign him after next year.
And that's where, again, this interior, because I agree with you. Like, I like Layden Robinson. I think he has potential. I love Mike Onwenu. But they need to figure out what their long-term plan is at center. Because if it's Strange, then you need to look at it and say, well, which one of these guys can play left guard? And if none of them can, then that's another need you have.
If it's Strange, you're going to have to pick up the option then.
Yeah, and that's a whole right. And so that's where
I have a hard time believing they will.
And I think they have, like you said, a lot of bodies and a decent amount of talent on the interior, but they have such uncertainty at tackle and they have uncertainty at center that they have to decide, probably before the draft, honestly, figure out, hey, do we think Layden Robinson or City So, one of them will be our starting right guard or left guard?
City So is going into year 3. So I think the other thing to keep in mind here is that City So is going into year 3. He's on a 4-year contract, which means he's a free agent after the 26 season. Mike Onwenu is also a free agent after the 26 season because he only signed a 3-year extension. So, again, looking down the road, they've got some decisions to make here because What do you do with Cole Strange? We both agree they're not going to pick up that option. If that's the case, you can't really pencil him in as David Andrews' replacement, even though he played fairly well those last 2 games that he did play this year. And then if you want to give City So a fair shake, that's fine. Then you have to figure out relatively quickly how he fits into your plans, because he may not be a long-term option because of his contract either. So they do have a lot of question marks, but certainly this news this morning about Will Campbell coming up just short of having 33-inch arms is going to be a big topic of conversation. And again, we're living in a world now where offensive line coaches want length, they want size at guard, they want guys that can control A gap and B gap and push piles. I think that you're going to see his stock drop a little bit, and I do think you could potentially see a team that says, you know what? Yeah, we like our guards. They're okay. We really like our tackles. We're going to take this guy and plug him in and play him as a guard and see if we can get the next Quentin Nelson out of it. Nonetheless, I still think he's a pretty damn good football player, and I still think he should be in consideration at 4. But this could now potentially open up the Patriots to other options at 4 as well. We got about 8 minutes left here, John. Free agency kicking off next week. We're going to have a full conversation about that, do a little free agency preview next Sunday. But looking at where things are right now, excuse me, looking at where things are right now, I mean, obviously we know what their priorities are in free agency, but what are a couple of other areas that you wouldn't mind seeing them go shopping in for veterans in free agency?
So there's been some talk about Mason Graham being in play at 4th overall. I think you don't need to do that if you sign a guy like Milton Williams and Poona Ford. And I think I would want both of those guys, frankly. But
defensive tackle is a much bigger need for them than people think.
yeah, because reports are already out. Devon Godshaw, they told him he can look for a trade. He doesn't fit in their new scheme.
He doesn't fit at all. And I think given what you owe him, John, I think it's a smart move.
Yeah, and Barmore, loved the player, but missed most of the year. There's uncertainty with health. And beyond those 2 guys, like I feel like, John, they never really adequately replaced Lawrence Guy when he left a couple years ago. Like they haven't built up.
They haven't found that guy.
No, they haven't. And I think, yeah, the guy. But I think
don't joke, Lyons.
Yeah. But Poona Ford is a guy really good against, believe it or not, one of the better run stuffing defensive tackles in the league.
And a great
last
name
year.
to boot, Poona.
Of course. But I think you put him next to Barmore, all of a sudden you're kind of in business. And you add in, and let's say they sign it, one of those Eagles guys, maybe it's Josh Sweat. I'd probably overpay for him, but one of those guys, now all of a sudden your defensive front is all set. Because I think right now, and we've spent entire shows talking about left tackle and receiver and even running back. Defensive tackle and linebacker are sneaky big needs for them. And they're not day 1 draft needs. They're not maybe even day 2 draft needs. But look at their linebacking core after Jawan Bentley went down last year. It was brutal. Like, and
he's coming off an injury. You cut Sione Takitaki. Tavai's coming off a down year. That is a major need, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's why I look at those position groups, and I look at defensive tackle as you can address that in free agency, and you can get quality guys who are under the age of 30 in Ford and Williams, and or whoever, guys under the age of 30 who are productive players, and then all of a sudden that's not a need anymore. I don't know about the linebacker class of free agency. I don't see a ready-made answer for them there. That is probably going to be a late day 2, early day 3 draft thing for them.
Yeah, or I think they could sign a veteran who becomes available after June 1st. I could see them in the veteran post June 1st veteran market, potentially a guy like a Kenneth Murray if Tennessee moves on from him. Certainly a guy that could be a possibility. This is where they could also make a trade. You got to remember now with linebackers, it depends on the scheme that they played in and where they're coming from. If they're playing in a scheme that is more willing to use 2 or 3 of them at a time in their personnel packages, then those teams emphasize the position more. But we're also living in a world, and I've been using that term a lot today, where we've been living in this world for a while now, where we're a heavy nickel dime package type of game. You know, maybe those teams don't carry as many linebackers. Again, I think a lot of it will depend on how the Patriots truly want to play, when you think about how they want to play schematically, I tell people, well, obviously watch Vrabel Titans tape if you can get it, or highlights. Detroit Lions tape, the way Aaron Glenn liked to play. I think they're going to be more of an attacking one gap, up the field kind of defense. To your point about Apuna Ford, if you sign him, he plays either the 2-eye or the shade nose. You kick Barmore to the 3 because he is longer and he is a guy that can penetrate and reset the line of scrimmage. That's how they want to play. It's not going to be so much, they're going to read hats, but you're not going to see as much two-gap. They're going to want guys to attack, get up the field, and reset the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, and I think that's why, to me, if they walk out of free agency with an answer at defensive tackle and then either receiver or left tackle, one of those positions all set, then I think it gives you a lot more options in the draft. And I think another one, and you kind of mentioned with so much nickel and dime defense, who's the number 2 corner opposite Gonzalez? Like, that's a real question. And look,
for them now for a couple of years.
Jonathan Jones is my favorite player on the team. I think one of the most underrated players of the dynasty. But he showed signs of decline last year. And even if he comes back, it's not a long-term answer. Alex Austin, I think, has potential, and there's some things to like, but he's a limited experience player, hasn't been around a lot. So that's another one that I think you could, and I think the name Charvarius Ward's been thrown out there. Like, there's some corners available that you can put opposite.
There's guys that if you're willing to pay them short-term, big money, you can get them here. Ward's a guy that I think he's willing to play anywhere. And a guy like Carlton Davis too, man. I mean, again, a lot of it is going to depend on what do you do schematically. My guess is they're going to play a lot of 2-press, 2-match, a lot of split coverages where they're playing one coverage on one side and one on the other. You're going to see a lot of that. The thing is, those bigger, longer corners now are either cover 3 type corners where you're playing a lot of single high, or they're squat guys that you press, reroute, and match with. Again, we'll see what they want to do there, but that's a position that in my opinion, John, and I think you'll agree with me, I could see them overspending in free agency if it meant getting the right guy.
Yeah, and I think they've always wanted, and this obviously predates Vrabel, but I feel like he agrees. Yes, they want the attacking front and they want that defensive line that penetrates, but they want stable cornerback play. Like, that's something that's been important to the Patriots for a long time, and I think that's going to continue. Although, look, new regime, I get it, but I think that's going to continue to be important. I mean, you look at whether it was Ty Law or Asante Samuel, Darrelle Revis, Malcolm Butler, Stephon Gilmore, now Gonzalez, whenever their defense has been good, they've always had at least one really good corner, but all those guys I just mentioned had an adequate guy on the other side, whether it was Otis Smith next to Ty Law, Brandon Browner next to Revis, Butler and Gilmore overlapped for a bit. Like, they always had another guy on the other side that was at least good enough player. And I just don't know if that guy is here right now. So I agree with you. That's something I could see them targeting kind of right away and overspending a little bit for.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting. And of course, it all kicks off next weekend with the start of free agency, the unofficial start Sunday and Monday with the good old tampering period. And then it officially begins on Tuesday when the new league year begins. So it'll be interesting nonetheless. I mean, we're into football now anyway, as it is. Spring practices have kicked off around here with Brian and Harvard. Combine wrapping up today. Free agency starts next week. Spring ball starts in the next couple of weeks. Plenty of football stuff to talk about. Sorry, NBA. Sorry, NHL. You just can't. Yeah. You just can't.
You know who starts spring practice on Tuesday, too?
Who?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Bill Belichick starts early, and, of course, they're going to be on Hard Knocks.
Yeah. How about that? I mean, you know what, too? And I know we're almost done with the show here. It's good for recruiting, but it's also another sneaky little way for him to show NFL owners, hey, I'm not the bad guy Robert Kraft said. I'm different now. I can communicate with young guys. Look at me on Hard Knocks. It's a little...
The only thing I would say to that, though, John, and whatever, it's our show, we can go as long as we want, but the only thing I would say to that is he's going to be 73 next month.
Yeah, and I get,
Like, even I get that. I get saying, you know what, look at me. I could do this, I could do that. But the bottom line is, if, let's say, he only stays in Carolina for a year and leaves, he's going to be 74 years old when he coaches the first game for his next NFL team. I mean, look, the guy takes care of himself. I guess he looks like he's in good shape. I'm sure his girlfriend keeps him in good shape. But I don't know his health status. All I know is this. He's going to be 74. Pete Carroll, 73 right now. I believe he's going to be 74 when he coaches his first game. I'd have to double check that. But the bottom line is, I mean, these guys aren't young. And you're looking at a short-term win-now window. So, again, anybody that hires him is hiring him for a quick 2 to 3 year fix, and then he's gone.
Yeah, and you're right. Yeah,
2 to 4 year window, provided he stays healthy. He coaches until he's 78, let's say.
Yeah,
I don't see the guy coaching into his 80s. That's not going to happen.
no, and I agree. I think that's why I think Hard Knocks can serve that purpose. And remember the buyout in the contract after June 1st, it's only $1 million. I could see him being at Carolina for 1 or 2 years and trying to leave. But if he gets through 2 years there and they're good, then I think he might just stay. Yeah, if they're good.
Especially because the college game has turned into the minor leagues for the NFL. You just saw Oklahoma. They just hired away Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl. He's their general manager. That's where college football is going. You've already seen guys like Jed Fish come out this offseason and say, forget about the traditional college offseason calendar. Teams are canceling spring games now. Fish is saying that colleges, particularly the FBS schools, should adopt the NFL calendar and start operating like NFL teams. College football is literally now becoming the minor leagues.
Oh, yeah.
NFL.
Yeah.
So if you're Bill Belichick, just like Nick Saban did when he left Miami to go to Alabama, Bill Belichick's going to realize pretty quick that I have way more latitude and power here than I would have if I went back to the NFL and I had to report to a general manager and a front office and an owner. I don't have to report to anybody but the AD here, maybe the president on occasion. But otherwise, even the AD, if you're Bill Belichick, Bubba Cunningham isn't going to hold anything over him. He is the king of the hill in North Carolina.
Yeah, and especially if they're good, like if they're good and they get into the college football playoff and win a playoff game this year, then I think, some of the people nationally that shit on him about like, oh, he didn't do much after Brady left, he got fired, blah, blah.
You can change the narrative.
That conversation changes. Right. And then but I think the Hard Knocks thing, it serves a dual purpose because I think it's good for recruiting for North Carolina. But if he does want to get back in the NFL, it's probably a better advertisement than Inside the NFL and the McAfee Show and the Manning Cast even were, because that's what that stuff was about this fall. So I think it serves a dual purpose, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. But I think it serves dual purpose.
I think it reinforces what I've said for years about North Carolina. They want to be good in football. It matters to them. People have said for years they're a basketball school, and they were. When Dean Smith was there, when Roy Williams was there, sure. They were a basketball school. But when they hired Mac Brown and he brought in Carl Torbush and they started recruiting at a high level and they started winning, they got a taste of it. And they said, you know what? Yeah, it's great winning in college hoops. It's great getting great crowds on a cold winter night to come see us play NC State or Duke. But at the end of the day, college football is king when it comes to college sports. And there's nothing like a Saturday afternoon playing in front of 70, 80,000 people. Yeah. So at the end of the day, the North Carolina is not stupid. They want to be good in football. They've always wanted to be good in football. They know that that's where the real money is. That this is why they're all in on this. And I think it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be fun to watch. And I think you bring up a great point, John. We're going to see another side of him, but this is definitely a part of his redemption tour and him rewriting his story. And I think it's going to make for great TV. And it'll be interesting to see how much of the Patriot way he brings with him to Chapel Hill. John, great job as always, my friend. Always great to see you. Always great to talk ball with you. And let's do it again next week.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And this time next week, we'll be right on the edge of free agency, believe it or not.
Yes, and Will Campbell officially has short arms. It's now official. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of Patriots Pulse. For my partner, John Lyons, I'm John Sarianides. Till next week, peace.